Hey, good morning, Westplex. Steve Casper with you alongside Mr. Nutrition, David Gull. It's time once again to What About Nutrition, the show that explores the link between nutrition and optimum health and asks the overlooked question many times, what about nutrition? Now, every day there's more scientific evidence and research regarding the critical importance of nutrition for the promotion of optimum health in you and your family. On this show, What About Nutrition, we'll focus on dietary supplements, herbs, vitamins, and homeopathic remedies, what they are, what they do, and how to use them. We'll also discuss diet, exercise, and other aspects of a living, healthy lifestyle in the 21st century. How about that? Your host is David Gull, sitting next to me, owner of O'Fallon Nutrition. Yes, the O'Fallon, not Illinois, it's Missouri. Folks, it's right here in Missouri. And a graduate of Washington University and Huntington College of Health Sciences in their comprehensive nutrition program. Remember, always consult your healthcare practitioner before beginning any new supplements or other changes to your lifestyle. The purpose of this show is to inform, educate, and entertain. We do the best we can, not to diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease, but you got the picture. And welcome again to What About Nutrition? It's good to be back with another week. Mr. David Gull, how you doing?
I am doing great. It's another week. I'm really excited to educate some more folks at home or in their cars or wherever they may be, and really generate some more awareness of how our health is impacted by nutrition and by all sorts of other things that can really cut people off. And today we're going to talk about fungus and yeast, Candida.
Oh, my favorite topic. Yeah. I mean, no question about it. Fungus and yeast. Okay. Let's try to picture that here.
Okay. So sometimes you hear about people, of course, we've all heard of yeast infections, and we've all heard of thrush that babies get, that white coating in their mouth, which is a yeast infection. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't realize that diaper rash is often a yeast infection as well. Mm-hmm. And so let's try to answer this question briefly. What is Candida? So it
was a song from 1973.
I think actually that's right.
Yeah, it is. It is the same guy who sang "Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree" and had a TV show. Can't remember his name, but go ahead.
It's true, and also not to be confused with the Roman Emperor Caligula,
exactly.
Who wasn't such a good guy.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But I remember the song, but I don't know Candida. What is it?
Okay, so Candida is part of a Latin name, Candida albicans, and that starts with the letter A, that albicans part. And Candida is spelled just like it sounds like, Candida. The only reason I spell it is if anybody wants to Google Candida or Candida albicans, it's a great way to do some research on this topic. So this is something that I feel like is basically an epidemic in the United States. It's a silent epidemic. It affects millions or tens of millions of people, in my opinion. There have been wonderful books written about this starting in the 1980s. The yeast syndrome was one of them. The yeast connection is another that's extraordinarily famous and still in print. The Yeast Connection was written by a Dr. Crook. I always almost hate saying that because here you're talking about a controversial topic and the expert is Dr. Crook. Yeah. But he was an MD and a famous guy and really devoted the final parts of his life to spreading awareness of this as an issue. So Candida is a yeast that grows inside the human body. It's naturally present in our digestive tract, in the urinary genital tract, and basically the warm, moist places in your body. And its presence isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when it overgrows or its population becomes dominant over other microorganisms in your body, such as the probiotic beneficial bacteria that live within us, then we start to develop issues. So Candida albicans is a type of yeast or fungus that thrives in a warm, moist environment. So human body is a great place for it to live. It thrives off of eating sugar and carbohydrate. So, of course, Steve, I'm sure you're familiar with wine. Mm-hmm. And, of course, in wine, the yeast eats the sugar from the grapes and converts it to alcohol.
Right.
And that's what yeast does in our body as well. It will consume carbohydrate or sugar, and it actually can convert it to alcohol. And it also excretes a chemical called acetaldehyde as a result of metabolizing sugar. And acetaldehyde is one of the same chemicals produced as a byproduct of metabolizing alcohol. So my point is that it excretes a toxin called acetaldehyde, which is one of the same things that gives us hangovers. So yeast is something that can create these symptoms that are very characteristic when it's become overgrown in a human body.
Right.
And so folks would look for symptoms such as fatigue, particularly fatigue that doesn't go away. If somebody has significant Candida albicans issues, that'll be a situation where when they wake up in the morning, no matter how much sleep they've gotten, they still feel really tired.
Wow.
You know, I'm sure we've all known people like that, or there might be people like that listening right now who, you know, no matter how much sleep you get, you're still really tired. And of course, in other episodes of our show, we've talked about adrenal exhaustion and things of that nature, and they can definitely contribute. But yeast is another thing that, because when it eats sugar, it excretes acetaldehyde and alcohol, as well as other toxins. Of course, you're going to get fatigue as a result of that. Also contributes directly to inflammation. So things like arthritis can be influenced by yeast overgrowth. Really, any itis condition is inflammatory, and yeast can contribute directly to that. So it's a really big deal. The other thing is it's a hidden cause of food cravings. So particularly these like drug-like cravings for carbohydrates that some people get that are very, very difficult to ignore. Candida is capable of producing certain compounds that cause our brain to crave carbohydrates, which of course is its favorite food. So if you think about it, that's a pretty interesting organism in that it takes its host, which is us, and it causes us to crave the food that feeds it. And unfortunately, that food is bad for us. And then when it eats that food, that sugar and carbohydrate, it converts it into these toxins such as acetaldehyde and alcohol that can give us symptoms such as fatigue, inflammation and arthritis type symptoms. There's a symptom known as brain fog that's very common to yeast, which is like this kind of spacey effect in your brain where it's difficult to remember things. Names don't come to mind as well. It feels like you're thinking through syrup, so to speak.
Yeah.
And let's talk about how you get yeast issues.
Okay.
So often folks will develop yeast issues after they've been on antibiotics.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes. So this is where we start getting into some interesting connections. So antibiotics, of course, are used to kill bacteria that are giving us an infection. However, antibiotics don't discriminate. They also kill the good bacteria that live throughout our body. So these antibiotics, when we take them, they kill what's making us sick, but they also kill our good bacteria that live in our digestive tract and our urinary tract, etc. When that good bacteria population is lowered, then the environment inside of our intestinal tract and inside of other parts of our body changes so that it becomes an environment that is conducive to growing Candida albicans or yeast. And one of the reasons for that is our good bacteria make lactic acid. So everybody's heard of acidophilus, or a lot of people have. So acidophilus is actually Greek for acidophile, which means acid-loving in Greek. And so acidophilus produces lactic acid, and that lactic acid changes the pH in the intestinal tract so that it's no longer appropriate for yeast. Everybody remembers the old Monostat commercials, et cetera, that would talk about the pH when women would have a yeast infection, right? Okay. So those good bacteria also live in that part of a woman's anatomy, and they also regulate the pH there. So that's a little connection for everybody that they can remember. These good bacteria make lactic acid. It discourages the yeast. But our point here is how you get it. So antibiotics kill off the good bacteria, which is the natural competition to yeast. That kind of leaves our body wide open for the colonization of other microorganisms. And yeast is very aggressive. It's already present. And once the good bacteria population is down, the yeast starts to grow. Its population goes up. And remember, we talked about it's fed by sugar. So a great way to create yeast overgrowth into somebody is to have them use antibiotics, kill off their good bacteria. Then you feed them carbohydrate and sugar or alcohol, which is like a super sugar. All three of those are foods for yeast. And then a yeast population goes up. Yeast then creates compounds that cause the person to crave more sugar, carbohydrate, or alcohol.
That's right.
And then the yeast population goes up again, and it'll create symptoms like fatigue or extreme fatigue, nail fungus. Of course, yeast infections are a clear red flag that something's going on. But brain fog, food cravings. Another thing I didn't mention earlier that's a common symptom is eczema or other skin issues. And I won't go deep into it, but I think I used to have yeast issues or Candida overgrowth in my body. And one of the symptoms I really suffered from was eczema on my face and my scalp. And my eyebrows would flake off, things like that. And it was not very pleasant throughout my adolescence. And once I went after yeast overgrowth in my body, at least in my case, that symptom basically disappeared. And to this day, if I start to consume a lot of sugar and alcohol for a few days in a row, I will start to get those symptoms back. I'll start getting flakes in the eyebrows and et cetera. It's not pleasant.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so
like Spock said.
Right.
Fascinating.
So Candida is this yeast that can almost act like a parasite in the human body. It can contribute to all sorts of symptoms that are not fun: fatigue, eczema, digestive issues. You know, a lot of conditions that people talk about, like irritable bowel syndrome or even Crohn's disease, those can all be influenced by yeast overgrowth, is another massive thing that I need to mention. At O'Fallon Nutrition in our store, whenever somebody comes in and complains of conditions or symptoms such as those, one of the things we ask them to look into is whether or not there might be Candida present. And the way you can do that is there's various books like The Yeast Connection that I mentioned by Dr. Crook. The Diet Cure that we're studying right now at O'Fallon Nutrition also has a great section on yeast. Or you can Google Candida albicans symptoms or Candida albicans self-questionnaire. There's tons of them out there, and generally what people do is they answer a series of questions, and then they will get a score, and that score will indicate whether Candida is likely or not likely. And then in addition to that, if one wants to take it a step further, there are stool analysis tests or saliva tests or blood tests that one can get. So this is some of the basic info about yeast, and on our next segment, coming up in just a few moments, we're going to talk about how one can go after this issue.
All right, and it's Tony, Orlando, and Dawn had Candida. Never mind. All right, we'll be right back with part 2 of today's discussion on What About Nutrition on Westplex Radio after this.